Sorry.
Good to
Can you
have
hear me?
you aboard.
All right. Hi, how are you?
Just fine. I was just introducing our audience as we were segueing into the live stream to Facebook to our show and to you tonight. And just introduced you as a best-selling author. Didn't tell about the book that was your debut book. Not too
Hmm.
many people's first efforts become a national bestseller. But folks, this
Yeah.
The Dogs of Babel.
Hmm.
It highlights a question I want to ask you. Maybe we'll just get to that question right away. But I picked this up, and I think I texted you, Carolyn, that what caught me, and you're not supposed to judge a book by the cover, but I'm such a dog
Uh-huh.
lover. I was in an old bookstore in Indiana, a fabulous bookstore that proceeds go to animal shelters. And I saw this dog on the front, and I picked it up and said, this looked like a good book. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. Tell us about what went into, was it a surprise to you, first of all, to have this first effort become a bestseller, and what went into writing? And then we'll talk about the book without giving it away. I highly
Hmm.
recommend it, folks. Yes, I am a promoter of all good things, books, music, but I just have so much to say, but I want you to talk to us. Tell us.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I agree that is a great cover and it's a beautiful dog on the front. And, that story is one of the reasons it's sad that we're losing bookstores. I love it when I see, especially an independent bookstore that's, making it work. But, there's nothing like the pleasure of picking up something off a table and just
Yes,
not knowing what to expect. And just, it's different thing when you're buying it online or something.
yes.
But, so I wrote that book. It took me about 2.5 years. It was the first. I had always, I've always written. I've always kind of wanted to be a writer, but this was the first thing I tried writing after I got a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, and then I thought, well, okay, so if I want to write novels, let's give it a try. And yeah, and I found it hard to figure out how to plot it and everything. I kind of
Mhm.
I've always wished that I could just, like write an outline and then write the book to match it. But I kind of I'm more the type of writer who figures that out as they go along. So
Uh-huh.
yeah. So with this one, I just I made a rule that I had to write a page a day.
Mhm.
And I could write more, but I couldn't stop before that. And that worked well for me. And I've tried various rules along the way. I it's not that I have to, trick myself into writing, but it's easy to let it slide, when, it's not a job like
Nine
someone's,
to five.
breathing
Yeah.
down your neck, it's not a 9 to 5 thing. And it's very easy to let things slide. So anyway, I finished the book. It's actually, this is very interesting. I'm just realizing this now. I finished all of the revisions the day before my first son was born, and that was 20 years ago today.
Wow.
Yeah, my son turns 20 tomorrow. I hadn't thought about it that way. But so I finished the book, did spend a few weeks on revisions, then had a baby, and then, put it aside for a couple of months. And then I started looking for a publisher. I found an agent first, and he was able to sell it fairly quickly. And, no, I didn't expect it to become a bestseller, but it was a very strange experience to have that be my first, experience with publishing,
Mm.
because, it's not always like that. I can tell you, now I've written, I've published 4 novels, and,
Yeah.
this one stands out as a very unusual experience. I have one other besides this that made the New York Times bestseller list for a couple of weeks, but, it doesn't always happen. And,
Oh,
it's,
first book, first baby. So
yeah, exactly. Right. Right.
so tell us what went into that, and then you can mention your other books.
Mhm.
And then you've written a couple children's books too. That
Yeah, I wrote a children's book called Cooking with Henry and Ellie Belly, and it's about my 2 kids who,
Oh,
yeah,
that's cool. That's cool.
yeah.
The dog on the front.
Hmm.
What possessed you to choose the dog that you did? I'm forgetting the species now. I've actually followed this dog and have tried to inquire about. We've owned dogs all our lives, and we're trying to fill our home with the one we lost last year. It was a
Hmm.
black lab. But
Mm.
what kind of dog is this again?
Well, I don't know if the one in the picture is the
Right.
right breed, but it's a Rhodesian Ridgeback.
Rhodesian
And
Ridgeback. Yeah.
I picked it kind of at random. I had like a big book of dog breeds. I wrote the book. I finished it in 2002. I wrote it for a few years before that. So the internet was around, but it was not as big a
Like
thing as it
now,
is now.
right.
So, research such as it was done much more with books. But I wanted it to be a big dog because the premise of the book is this guy his wife has died and he's trying to figure out what happened. And it occurs to him that the dog was a witness. And if he can teach the dog to talk,
Right.
he might know the answers. And I thought, that I'm asking kind of a lot of suspension of disbelief with my readers. And if I do, if I give him like a teacup poodle that he's there, sitting with alone in his office trying to talk to, it's going to turn ridiculous. I wanted it to be sort of a big noble dog, and I just liked the breed. It was originally called, I think, African lion dog, and I liked the idea that dogs that I don't know, hunt lions or interact with lions. It's just a whole different kind of thing for most dogs.
They are quite a breed. But and so segue into how that the dog was a possible witness to the death of one of the characters, the wife of the protagonist, and how that you talk about suspending. So as I'm reading it, and I'm not sure if this was the experience of most readers, you could let me know that in the comments that you've gotten at book readings and book signings, but I'm like wanting, and I don't want to give a lot away, but I'm wanting this best case scenario, positive thing to happen. And yet there's a good ending, but it's hard to say.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of your older books, but yeah, you handled that so well that despite the disappointment, I think I felt more of an overwhelming, like, wow, and a rebuke to myself, like, you knew, Ralph, all along that this was going to work out that way.
Right.
Beautiful. You would think, I just have to say this, and I'm trying to do the right way to say it, but you would have thought that pulling a suspense and disbelief into a romantic kind of poignant kind of grieving would be, you can't do that. There's no way. And yet you did it. And I think that's a huge kudos to you, that maybe that was part of why it became a national bestseller. I mean, on the front of the copy I have, I think there's a couple covers. This is a good one. I saw one today that was kind of interesting, but the New York Times said it was a captivatingly strange book. That's a great way to almost oxymoronic statement there. The Dogs of Babel rises to reach a final moment of pure steering grace. I mean, there are people, that's their job, to write accurate.
Yeah, I know. That was a very nice, nice review,
But accurate though, I really think. So you sound like you have to discipline yourself. I'm kind of that way too. But yet inspiration has to come to us. I write it myself, and hopefully someday we'll produce something. But was the process organic in coming to that moment, or those moments where suspense and romanticism and poignancy and looking back with longing and yet being okay in the present? You didn't have all that figured out, right?
Right. No, not really. I was writing it as a newlywed, it was the first few years of my marriage. And I think that that's where some of the romance comes from. But I was also, getting used to being married. I would say, it's a wonderful romantic thing, but it's also learning that not everything is romance. And, and I was very interested in the question of how well can you ever know another person, and how well can you be known, because it doesn't matter how close you are to a person, a friend, a partner, whatever, there are still things you're never going to know about what goes on in their mind. And so I was kind of looking into, that, but I knew, I know that as a reader, it's really important to me when I read a book that there be some reason to keep turning the pages. I want there to be a little bit of suspense there, and so, I love, books with beautiful, narrative voice, and, it doesn't have to be like a murder mystery, but, I want there to be some question nagging at me the whole time, and that's what keeps you turning pages. So that's why I tried to mix in some mystery from the beginning, I think.
But it was the kind of mystery that isn't just mystery put out front, full blown, like now I'm reading a Hitchcock thriller. But I guess that's what I just loved about it, that it was, because there's nothing wrong with that genre. I mean, obviously, because he was very,
absolutely,
I was just talking to Bruce Cameron, who, interestingly enough, in his books about dogs, his favorite genre to read is mystery books growing up, and he's got some series about dogs in mysteries. But his bestsellers, of course, the dog books, but it's very interesting. I think the characters for me were very three-dimensional because of how that you brought in, you never know somebody. And really, as we interact with human beings, our loved ones, our spouses, how do we know that they're not living down the shadow so that they can be the better person for their spouse, but yet it bubbles up to the surface every once in a while. And that happens here frequently in both those characters.
Right.
And his memory of her, I should say, but
Yeah.
I don't want to say too much.
Yeah. I mean, everything we know about the wife, Lexi, is filtered through Paul, and it's, you know, she's dead from the very first page. So it's not like that part isn't a mystery, but you know, what he tells us about her, I wouldn't say he's necessarily an unreliable narrator, but in the beginning, he's very much in the throes of grief.
Yes.
And he's only remembering like the very best about her. And, you know, it's painful to him to think of any, you know, and he thinks maybe he didn't know her as well as he thought he did. But I think there were things he knew that he has to come to terms with himself over the course of his grieving. So that's kind of what part of his journey is, I would say.
So,
and the teaching a dog to talk is only, I mean, it's, I took it seriously, and it's like something I enjoyed writing, but it, you know, the book is very firmly grounded in reality. It's not like a science fiction book. So you pretty much do figure out that the dog isn't going to talk. But the thing is, it's more like that's a way of him working out his grief and trying to sort of come to terms with what their relationship was.
And becomes that your whole turn from, I hope that somehow that might work out. But then when it does, you think, well, of course it didn't, like I shared with you earlier, but yet it's just good. It's just good. And the resolution of conflict, really, it is a journey of the grieving process of that individual being such a hero, and all you remember is the good. It really, it's a good book to maybe to require with the grief sharing groups that meet in churches and different places throughout the country. And I've heard of that program in this area of Michigan where I'm from. Before I moved here, I hadn't heard of it, but there are many churches that have used that. We've used it the past year at our church, but I'd almost make that required reading so that people could see what folks go through and maybe relate to some aspect of it.
Yeah, the thing that I liked about writing about grief is that it's not a standard thing from one person to another. You know, it's a universal thing that we all have to deal with at some point in our lives. But what happens with this character is that things that would have seemed crazy to him like a year ago suddenly don't seem so crazy. You know, it's just his whole world has been knocked sort of on its side. And so it doesn't seem so crazy. You know, he's a linguistics professor. He has faith in and he sort of feels like this dog knows what happened. You know, if only I could get that out of her head, you know. So it seems not so crazy. And that was kind of what I liked about grief as a plot element. Yeah.
So when you finished this book, how long did it take before you went to your next one, and how successful was that?
My second book, I came out, I guess about 3 years after the first one. So, you know, actually my second baby was born around the time that the, you know, second book was finished, but I stopped there. I only had, you know, I couldn't keep having a baby every time I wanted to finish a book, you know. But my second book, it was called Lost and Found, and it was about a bunch of people on a reality show. It's a show that's a lot like The Amazing Race, which is still on the air now and which has always been a favorite of mine. It's different. It's a scavenger hunt, but it's teams of two people traveling around and trying to, you know, solve puzzles and stuff. And through that lens, you meet a mother and daughter, and they're the main characters. And the mother, it's a teenage girl who recently was pregnant and hid her entire pregnancy and gave birth alone in her room. And so that's what they're trying to recover from. That's something that happened recently to them. And, you know, it turns out that every team has their things that they're dealing with. There's a pair of brothers, there's people who are friends, there are married couples, but they all have something that they all have secrets they're carrying. And it all kind of comes to the surface through the stress of traveling and being constantly on camera. So that's what that one was. And that one did okay. You know, it wasn't, I mean, sales wise, it wasn't amazing. It did in paperback, spend a couple of weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. So that was great, you know. And since then, you know, I've had 2 novels since then, and
Mhm.
they're all my babies. I love them all, but it's unclear what makes what makes a book successful or not. It's hard to know. I think even in the publishing industry, nobody knows what makes people buy books. It's like
Kind
the
of
big
random,
question.
right? First,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
cut it
so
down, this is the click way to do it, but then you don't
yeah,
want to be formulaic because
right,
life is so three-dimensional, not just like characters, but our conflicts, the people we come in, just the different phases of our lives that wax and wane with what we
right.
face. So it's quite a move to go from adult fiction to young adult.
Mhm.
I'm not.
It was a picture book, a children's picture book
Okay.
that I wrote. Yeah.
Younger.
Yeah. It just, my kids, it was just, when I had young kids, I was, obviously around them all the time. And it just, they had my kids had this game when my son was about like 5 and my daughter was 2. They would have this game where they put on a cooking show, and it was just very funny and cute to watch them interact. And like the 5-year-old was in charge because he was the one who could talk and do all the stuff, but my 2-year-old daughter would like she makes him put on a pirate hat instead of a chef's hat in the book, things like that. It's just like they had this dynamic that was fun for me to watch. And so, it was fun to come out, to write that book and then to see it illustrated, all of that was great. And, I don't know why I haven't gone back to it. Maybe I will at some point, but it was a really great experience to have that children's book come out. And it's sort of, it's nice to have that for my kids as they grow up, that I have that sort of snapshot. Yeah.
I've noticed that. I know that young adult literature is probably one of the fastest growing genres in the country. It has been for quite some time because both parents and kids can read the same thing. Now, with the younger ages you've written about, I've noticed that it's actually a lot of the younger picture books are more like poems or prosaic pieces that you wouldn't notice if you're just a kid, but the way the rhythm and the rhyme and the pictures go together, it's actually a very, I think, underrated genre. And did you follow that? Had you read some picture books?
I'd read a lot of picture books just because I had kids and I, wanted them to be readers and, so I read to them a lot. But yeah, and there's a wide variety of different kinds of picture books out there. And, I think you do have to try to appeal to the parents as well a little bit, not to just, because if you're going to read a book 30 times, because the kid wants you to keep reading it, it's better if the parent doesn't get too bored with it, so I had that in mind, sort of. Yeah.
Interesting. So did you always want to write as a young person? And were there influences, not just in terms, you could talk about this too, in terms of what you were reading at the time, like, wow, that was so good. I wish, or I hope someday. But that, as well as direct influences, instructors, teachers, parents that helped you kind of form that in your mind and your heart as a goal.
Yeah. I always loved making up stories and telling stories. And that was kind of the origin of it. And when I was a toddler, like 3, I told a story to my mother and she wrote it down and made it into a little book. And, that was kind of a nice thing to have, and from that point on, I always said that I wanted to be a writer, but what that meant and how I thought I would go about that wasn't always clear to me as a child. But it was pretty much a clear career path in that there was never anything else I really seriously considered doing. But I mean, when I got out of college, I worked in a bookstore for a few years. I had various jobs and, you can't just say I'm a writer, boom, you got to make a living and so forth. But I was very lucky in that growing up, I had a lot of support from my parents and from teachers. I always sort of excelled in writing. And so I got, that was what I got praise for. I was okay at math, but it was never like my big thing, so writing was what I got good feedback for. And it was what I liked doing the best. So, I really do feel lucky that I get to do this for a living, and it is pretty much what I always wanted to do. When I was writing The Dogs of Babel, my favorite book at the time was The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. It was later made into a movie, which I didn't like quite it was a good movie. It was fine, but the book I think is better. And when I went back some years later and reread it, I could really see how I had been influenced by, just
without even knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. And that changes. I think it's really important for writers to be readers and to read, a wide variety of stuff and just see, there's something when you're a writer, you don't cease being able to read for pleasure. That's not quite it. But there's always like an extra layer in your reading where you're saying, I wouldn't have thought to do that. How did he do that? And I'm really surprised by that. How did the author do, that kind of thing. Where I'm always sort of comparing myself a little bit to, to the writer I'm reading. But, I think most writers become writers because we are readers and because we grew up loving reading and, thinking if I can do this, that would be the best
thing. What I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed this too, if I could just chime in there, is whatever I'm reading at the current moment in my writing, whether it's church bulletin or that I do, or poems or my journal, that some of that, I use this term probably too much, but organically, naturally comes out without me even thinking about it. It's almost like the book I'm reading, fiction or even nonfiction. And I try to read, I think you just mentioned, a well-rounded group of books. I always got 4 or 5 going, and my mind is in there somewhere, but it doesn't come out in a formulaic, conscious way where I'm going to sit down and write like so-and-so.
Right.
If you're a lover of literature, it happens, right?
Yeah, I've noticed that my thoughts sometimes take on the rhythm of the prose that I'm reading, like if I'm reading something, Jane Austen or something that's a couple hundred years old, and suddenly I'm thinking in more complicated sentences. Whereas if I'm, if I'm reading something where the sentences are short and, very sort of pithy, then it's an interesting thing.
It doesn't happen really literally 100%.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of my other job as a preacher. I mean, it would be quite funny if I started preaching like some of the books.
Right, exactly.
But I do sense that vein or that spirit of inspiration and that kind of way that they write coming through, even that. And what's kind of cool to think about, I think if anybody's a creative person, the arts, whether it's music, writing, drama, speaking, it just sort of relates. It's that other part of the brain that many of us have, but maybe don't tap into the other. I've never been the science math guy, although I did know enough, and I think we had similar backgrounds, probably sounds like. But well, what I want to do is maybe do another interview with you about another book. Would that be possible? In a few months? It keeps me reading, and I think it helps promote your books. But what would you recommend? Now, you mentioned one that I didn't notice was on, as I studied, you got Harmony, the Nobody album, and the one you mentioned,
Lost and Found is the Lost and Found. Yeah. So my 4 novels are The Dogs of Babel, Lost and Found, The Nobody's album, and Harmony. And Harmony is the most recent, although it's now like 5, almost 6 years since it came out. But yeah. So, I don't know. So I told you about Lost and Found. The Nobody's album is about a writer who is estranged from her son, and she decides to go back and rewrite the endings of all her novels. So that's what that one is. And the endings of the novels are scattered throughout the book. So you kind of have to, you get to see, it was, I don't know, it was hard to write, but I really enjoyed writing it because I would get to the end of a chapter about the main characters, and then I would think, all right, now I'm going to come up with her novel,
That sounds difficult to do.
Yeah. So there's that one, and also her son is a rock star who's been accused of murdering his girlfriend, although she doesn't believe he did it, so that's all going on. Wow. And then Harmony is about a family that joins a cult. Basically, it's about a family that has a daughter who is on the autism spectrum, and my son is on the autism spectrum, and that was, a big part of the influence. I was writing about how it can be very challenging to raise a kid with special needs, and I remember thinking, what would it take for me to, if I was also thinking about cults and what makes intelligent, well-educated, fairly grounded people join cults, because it happens, and I remember thinking at my most vulnerable points of parenting, if there had been a charismatic leader who said, I can help you with this, come live at my camp and live off the land and get away from technology, I might have, probably wouldn't have, but
Yeah.
in any
You
case,
never
the
know.
characters in the book do that. And so that's what that's about. So, I would say think which one, and if any of those appeals to you,
This last one does. I think
Yeah.
they all do in some sense. I see you
Mhm.
leaving in suspense again, and one of them you mentioned.
Yeah.
This last one, Harmony. Maybe that's what I'll do, and maybe I'll try to go back to the same bookstore. It's a
See,
great
yeah,
excuse to go down
right,
on a little
right.
day trip, but
Yeah,
maybe we can make a connection this summer sometime and
sure,
talk about that
absolutely.
book. That'd be
Mhm.
great. I thank you so much for coming aboard to Faith Family and Friends Night. What we'll do is I'll trim this video up and send it to you so you can have it.
Okay,
For friends and
thank you.
family. And I appreciate you coming aboard. Where are you calling me from tonight anyway? Where are we zooming?
I
West
am in
Coast.
Washington, DC. Yes, Washington, DC. That's where I live. So
Okay.
yes. And
The
thank you so
Beltway.
much for having you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
You're
And
welcome. God bless you, Caroline. I
all
look
right,
forward to
thanks.
reading
Take care.
Harmony.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.